All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We have Matthew Steele, who works here at UNC Charlotte as an art installer as well as technical assistant in our art department. Matt is also a sculptor and a designer local to Charlotte. And he is here today to speak a little bit more about how to get your work out in the community, how to market yourself as an artist, and just how to set yourself up for success. So with that, Matt, I will hand it over to you. I know you have some really great things to show us.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for having me. So I've been a Charlotte-based artist since 2012. I moved here right after a residency at McCall Center that I somehow managed to get when I was still finishing my undergrad. After that, I ran the Media Lab at McCall Center for about 6 years, and then I've been at UNCC ever since. And primarily my work revolves around sculpture. So a lot of kind of architecturally influenced design elements integrated, and I work primarily with wood. So this piece is all walnut, cut down to 1/4 inch stock, and that's kind of become a template for me, basically a base unit for me to work with. And I'll make these forms and repeat them in space to create volumetric shapes. Apart from being a woodworker, my base was really in design. I went to college initially to be a graphic designer, and then was quickly kind of underwhelmed by what I was achieving. So I had taken a sculpture class just to fulfill a requirement, but really started to understand the parallels between the, say Adobe Illustrator and what the wood shop is. So I began, experimenting there, and since then, my work has taken a few little twists and turns, but really, I still think of myself first as a sculptor, but we'll look at some drawings and some other things later on. And I'm going to talk about a very old piece that I made when I was in college. It doesn't look like any of those other things. And that was this piece, which I kind of looked at as a feat. I had this idea, I'm going to whittle all the wood off of a pencil and leave just the bare lead. It's just sort of a challenge to myself because I wasn't a craftsman yet. I didn't have a lot of tools in my belt. So I did that. I bought a box of 100 pencils and just got to it with nothing but a box cutter, no trickery. And this was the result. What I thought I was doing was kind of accomplishing that feat. But what I realized after the fact is I was actually recontextualizing an object that all of us come in contact with every day. So a regular number 2 pencil that we all maybe touch or see every day, this changes the way that you see that object. And I think that that's what art has the power to do. It has the power to, kind of change the world around you, the way that you see it, the way that you perceive things. So I want to just briefly talk a little bit about my process and how I come to material and form. This was a piece called Continuum I made in 2018, which was kind of it was for a themed show at Goodyear Art called Homeward Bound. It was all about the theme of home. And I had just purchased my first home, in a state I didn't grow up in. So that was very, very close to me. It was close to the surface at the time. And what I did was I just went into my basement and looking around for pieces of this home that I hadn't explored yet. And what I found was the mantle of the home that had been discarded when they redecorated the place. And it had been stored in a leaky basement, and it looked pretty rough, but I thought I'm going to cut this up and see what's inside. And what I found was just that. It was a water damaged, mildewed piece of wood, old piece of heart pine. And I thought my search had kind of ended because it seemed like a dead end. This isn't viable material. it's inconsistent. What am I going to do? But then I realized, there is almost this gradient happening with this material in color. So I decided, yeah, maybe I'll make some sort of gradiated form. There's that graphic design background, right? And then I thought about like what home is, and I thought of just the simple A-frame truss that I could reproduce many times. Part of my process is very much based in digital fabrication. So this is my CNC machine in my basement, which is 5 foot by 10 foot. And what I'm doing here is cutting essentially a template that I'll use to put all those pieces inside of. So here I am filling this up, paying careful attention to the color. I grouped all these pieces according to color. And there you can really see it. From the left, you have this kind of very pale green, all the way to the other end of the circle, which is, that reddish heart pine. This is the finished piece. But it really became about the nature of home and the relative nature of home. When we purchased this house, we were starting this new continuum, this cycle of what home is at that time, but we were, at the end of that cycle of home for someone else. So I also want to talk about this project. In 2015, I was one of the first artists to take part at Goodyear Arts. And Goodyear Arts at one time was actually in an old Goodyear building. They basically gave us the keys and said we could do whatever we wanted in there. At the time, I was making, pretty small scale bench size woodwork, and I had no idea what I was going to do in that space. But part of the deal was we could also utilize anything that was in the building. So I found this room next to mine that was filled with this slotted steel that they had used to build racks for the tires. So I thought, maybe my process can translate into this medium. I was mostly concerned with this space. It was a 2,000 square foot room I was going to have to fill, or I thought I'd have to fill. And I was thinking about like Gordon Matta Clark and his work, basically, cutting up and destroying buildings. And I thought, well, I can break through this wall and actually use it to support the sculpture itself. So from that volume that I created, I made sort of a wireframe of something that could take up that volume. And I just started making it. I made it with a grinder, a Sawzall, and an impact driver. And I made it flat on the ground, hinged on one side so I could open it up like a book. So these are pretty gnarly pictures, but on the left, you can kind of see it closed, and then a big group of people helping me out spread it apart, and we cut a hole in the wall and put it right through. And this piece was made in about 3 weeks with just about $1,000. So this is it into the next room, and just for scale, the whole piece is about 70 feet long. This section is about 12 feet. So from one big thing to another, in 2019, I was asked if I would be interested in creating a piece of public art for a private business. And it's really hard to break into public art. A lot of people say you can't do it until you've done it already, which is kind of this conundrum. So the only guidance they gave me was they wanted a face. And I don't do a lot of figurative work, but I really needed this to work. So I thought about some volumetric trickery. I was experimenting with some software, and I thought, I could probably pull this off. They had a really small budget, so I was stretching that budget as much as possible. And what that means is I was going to do a lot of things myself. I was going to outsource some stuff, but everything I could afford, or everything I couldn't afford, I was going to do myself. This was the site which gave me some really interesting options in terms of creating more depth than, or creating an object that appeared to have more depth than it did by utilizing this little cove. So I made a base kind of design, and my friend Robbie Sachs really did the nuts and bolts on how this thing was going to get CNC cut and send it off. And this is how I received the piece back from the painter, a box truck full of pieces. And this is right when COVID happened. So any help that I thought I was going to get was skeptical or unwilling to do so. So my wife and I really built this whole thing ourselves, like a giant puzzle. We weren't always that happy when we were doing it, but so this is one aspect of this project that did sort of surprise me, working on a scale like this. I'm often doing, one action thousands of times. I'm used to that. I received this box of 10,000 bolts that I realized I'm going to have to put every one of these bolts in by myself. So all these reinforced sections in the back. I realized when I was doing it, each of these sections is just going to take 25 minutes, 30 minutes. That's as fast as I can do it. But luckily it was the pandemic, so I had a little extra time. So there's the concept rendering, the architectural model, and then this, we built it in chunks so we could fit it through the double door. And here is Jim Gallucci. He's an art installer, hanging it on the building. So after, oh yeah, we'll look at this a little bit. So after that project, I knew I needed to just be in my studio for a while. I needed to make, pieces for me. I needed to make more intimate work. And something I was playing around with was using my CNC router to draw. So on the left, you'll see a 3D program. This is Google SketchUp, and essentially I have a physics simulator in there, so I can assign something the property of a piece of cloth, say, and then I can simulate the gravity, the wind, tell it what it's landing on, and the accumulation of those drops I found created some pretty interesting volumetric forms. So I'm doing two-dimensional work on a computer, but I still see this as, I see it through the eyes of a sculptor. So on this bottom left, you can see like this is an object with volume and form, but then I'm using it to create a flat object that kind of embodies that. So this is all just created by thousands of passes with my CNC router holding a pencil. I found these very fancy Japanese mechanical pencils that auto advance when they feel pressure. So each one of these would be 20 to 30 pieces of lead. So I'm kind of just babysitting the machine. Maybe I'm letting it go and doing something else, and I'm back and forth. And this is a show I had in October of last year. This is my first solo show in a while. So you see these pieces in the background, these sculptures. These are the Basalt series, which I've really kind of came to during COVID as well. And you'll see some drawings on the left and right. And these basalt structures, I led with that picture of the bridge. But something I'm trying to get away from is more recognizable imagery, objects that feel utilitarian and are using the kind of the vocabulary of the manufactured world. It still feel natural in a way. What I don't want to do is build models of things. That's not very interesting to me anymore. I'm really more interested in finding this kind of middle space between the man-made and naturally made objects. So these are sort of an offshoot of those pencil drawings done with pen instead of pencil. They're done on black paper. I became really interested in trying to create as much volume as I could with a drawing. And I made a small series of 9 of these, and they're pretty small. I think they're 10 by 14. But I really loved the effect, this kind of ghostly nature of the white pencil on the black paper. And I thought, my machine's pretty big. I can probably do a bigger version of this. So this was essentially a 9-foot by 4-foot version of these drawings, which I do call the Formless series. This is all, I lost my father at this point in time, and the end was pretty rough. So you'll see in these forms here, you have some body parts, you have some teeth, elbows, hands. It was kind of my way of dealing with those last days. I was lucky enough to be there with him. But this gave me this idea that it doesn't need to be trapped in pen or pencil and on paper. I'd just been approached by Honeywell to do a series of pieces for them. So you'll see the evolution here. This is a very similar process with one big difference. This is actually acrylic panel that's been painted black, and I've etched all these lines in with a 16th inch bit. So it's hard to see in pictures, but as you walk around it, the light affects all these different glossy pieces of paint, these almost separate little panels, almost like stained glass. Another project I just made for them was this set of turbines. Sort of a tricky thing with working with clients. Sometimes they have sometimes immovable ideas about what they want, and the back and forth between artist and client is a tricky one. We think of art being a very autonomous place where you can kind of do whatever you want. That is not the case in corporate placement. There's a lot of negotiation. Sometimes it feels like you're going through a lawsuit or something. There's like a lot of corporate jargon. There's a lot of back and forth. Part of their criteria for these pieces, Honeywell is obviously, they make widgets. They're in everything, thermostats, fans, but also aeronautics, aerospace. So something that they said to me was they want the objects to be representational for something that they make, but not recognizable easily to the viewer. Their logic there was they could move out of aeronautics, and then they have these big airplanes, right? That would look funny. So where we landed on this piece was, this is a turbine, a fan and a turbine, but it's so abstracted that they might not know it. So this was the rendering that I sent them. And rendering is something that has been a very powerful tool for me, because people want to buy what they can see. They don't want to buy an idea. And now I'm pretty quickly, I can, create a rendering for something with pretty high degree of accuracy, show them what they're going to get. So this is the approved rendering. This is how I started. It's made of, each fan has 37 of the same component. And this little white spacer here, that's what's helping me get the right angle. So I was able to make that 3D model and make this little contraption, 3D print it, and know that my measurements aren't really measurements. I'm using an object to dictate that measurement for me with a lot more accuracy than I can do with a tape measure. And the whole thing is held together with these little copper rods. You can kind of see them creating that lift, and each piece has 13 little holes drilled in it. And those, receive that rod and hold it tight, their tension fit, and then take just a little bit of glue on the backside. So here's a set that's not trimmed yet. And then you can see me here starting to put them together in place. I made it in 2 big sections and then kind of squashed them together. And then here I am installing them. I installed the second one last weekend, so this is very fresh. And there are those pieces. All right. Happy to talk about anything if people have questions. But I'll give some, yeah, let's just open it up.
No, Matt, that was incredible. Does anyone in the audience have questions immediately? I'm just curious, how big are those combines that you hung on the wall?
Those turbines are 7 feet tall.
Wow, it's amazing. I mean, students start thinking about questions. But I'm just curious, Matt, when did you decide that I want to be an artist? I want to do this. I want to take a chance. I want to, put myself out there, my creativity out there. When did that decision happen for you?
I don't know. I think I always knew. I was just a pretty naturally creative kid, but I was never. I wouldn't say I was artistically gifted. I was always a pretty poor draftsman. And then I think I found, I learned to draw on the computer when I was pretty young. My dad got me on a computer really young. So, I mean, I would say 3rd or 4th grade, I was starting to, play around on the computer. But I don't know. Couldn't tell you. But I'm still figuring it out.
No, absolutely. And in the chat, Jerry asked, how do you find customers for your art? You mentioned a few times that people reached out to you. I guess, how did you initially make those connections to eventually be asked by them, like Honeywell?
So at this point in time, I have a gallery. I'm represented by Hodges Taylor, and they're doing 99% of that work. They're seeking out clients, or clients are coming to them, and they will, listen to what that client wants and needs, and then call on me. Anymore, I don't really have much work ready to go. Like, I'm kind of waiting, in a sense, for those commissions to come in, to kind of fulfill the need for that client. I'd love to have more time to just have work ready to go. But I kind of believe the idea of like looking for clients is misunderstood. I think that the work is what's going to draw people in, and there's certainly something to be said about making yourself visible and available. But I think that the work is it's the honey in the trap. Like, if you're making good work, you keep doing that. I think that those customers show up.
No, thank you for that. Mike also asked, do you recommend to work with a galleryist, I guess, or gallerist, or work independently?
I think that there's validity to both, and I think you can do both. I feel like what a lot of artists don't know is that galleries traditionally take about 50%. So that's a chunk, and sometimes that's hard to swallow. But they're also giving you more work that's going to get you more work eventually, right? So it's a trade-off. If you are doing that independently, there are certainly going to be opportunities for you, but there are going to be opportunities you're not privy to, because they're sort of landing these big contracts. So right now, my gallery has got several contracts with, they just did Honeywell, they have Truist, they have TIAA. They're big clients that have bigger needs. And I still do sell to individuals, that happens. But I find that corporate spaces for me allow me to work at the scale that I want, which is impractical for the majority of people. And my work's not very cheap. So it's a tough ask for a lot of normal people.
Yeah, go ahead.
But working independently is how you should start. I mean, you should certainly not wait to get to a gallery.
Can you speak to us a little bit about how did you make it into the gallery space? What's the process for, researching the galleries in the area, making those connections, preparing your portfolio?
I think that those are all good things to do. I think that I just made myself visible enough for the gallery to come to me. I didn't approach the gallery, and I've yet to do that, approach a gallery. And that day might come. But with most things in life, I kind of just wait. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I mean, we saw a lot of your amazing projects. Can you talk to us just about like the timeline for each one? Like what's the conception process? I mean, what is the timeline for, any of the projects you've done? I especially like the face one that you did for that office building.
Yeah, so that funny story about the face. That took it took a year, and I know that because the day I finished, I looked back and realized that I'd made the folder almost exactly a year prior, right? So a project like that, where you're working on a big scale, you're working with vendors, pandemic, material shortages, all those factors contribute. I would say that the work that I make in my own studio, that's generally pretty fast. I'll spend maybe a quarter of the time getting the project designed and set up, getting templates made. And then probably probably half is assembly, cutting, and then finishing is really what kind of kills me. It takes a long time. So that's sanding and varnishing. That's probably an additional quarter of the time.
And I know you love wood. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, please.
No, I was just say, I know you love wood. I mean, when did you decide wood is my medium? Or are you exploring other mediums as well?
It's always a part of what I'm doing, I think. But really, I would say around 2007 is when I started getting into woodwork, and just kind of took it and ran with it.
So I know we have, a variety of students on the call, whether they're in the art program or not, but they're obviously interested in art since they're here. Talk about your time management, because I know you work here at UNCC. You're also an artist, doing this amazing work in the community. How do you organize, yourself, your time, your projects, to not hopefully be too overwhelmed in life, managing multiple streams of income. I know a lot of artists, that's how they do it. And I think for some that can be daunting, but if you know how to do it and manage that well, it seems like you're managing it very well. I think that could be a really amazing career path. So can you just talk a little bit about how you personally do that?
Yeah, I think the main thing is, what you don't see in this PowerPoint is like, just you sacrificing a lot of stuff. You're saying no to a lot of things. You might not make it home for Thanksgiving because it's a lot of evenings and weekends. But it's kind of amazing once you get that. It's kind of like working out or running. Like once you get used to that, like, okay, from 5 to 6, I'm gonna get in a little bit of time, then I'm gonna eat dinner, and then then 3 or 4 days this week, I'll be down there from, 7 to 11. Uh, there's a lot of time if you kind of dig out that time. But it definitely comes with some sacrifice. But it's still all practice to me. Like, I'm still getting faster. I'm still getting more efficient. And I definitely am better at picking my battles. Like, I wouldn't make that big face again. But that's part of the process.
And during your presentation, you talked about different individuals that helped you with installations and maybe different parts of your process. Who are those key people that you would say as an artist, I hire for that? Like, I'm not going to do that particular role myself. Who are some of those key, either people or, I guess, skills, or the strengths that someone else is building or bringing to the project?
Sure. I think school really reinforces like self-sufficiency and like becoming excellent in your own little world, and I think that that's great. I think that's a good place to start. But I've found that the world of potential really opens up if you can be honest with yourself and say, like, who's going to do this better than I'm going to? Who's going to allow me to break into this other material and collaborate with? So anything that I can't do myself, that I don't feel like, or I would be doing myself an injustice to try to do it myself. It's super empowering to realize, like, you can get that, you can hire that help, or you can collaborate with somebody that can provide that for you. Certainly, lifting like a 2-ton sculpture onto a wall is something that you should probably hire a professional. So that was like, in that case, they're gonna do it. They're gonna do it better than you're gonna be able to, like renting something from Sunbelt. That it's important to remember that there are professionals for a reason, and you don't have to do everything. You just don't have to do everything.
Yeah, and Amber had a follow-up question. What was the first project that you did where you did bring someone in based on their skill set?
I think when I was in college, I collaborated with some painters, which was kind of interesting, where I'd kind of maybe CNC cut a panel and have them paint on it, and I think that kind of gave me the idea that like there are other people out there that can contribute meaningfully to this. Another project I didn't talk about was a short film that I made during the pandemic, which was sort of my first pass at 3D animation. And I kept thinking, like, about them, like I was making these pieces and they were cool, and I was like kind of playing around with music and does this fit? And then I remembered, like, oh, like I can reach out to a musician, like we can collaborate on this together. So As the Boundary Pulls Apart is the short film, and I reached out to the first chair or the principal violist of the Charlotte Symphony, told him about the project, and I kind of assigned him the task of making a short piece of music, and then I animated to the music, and it's so much better than would have been trying to find something that fit. It changed the whole project, and that didn't cost me anything. Well, I mean, I had a stipend to do it, and it was a small stipend. I just said, well, we'll split it. But that went on to go to the Mint Museum and other things. And when you bring other people in like that, you also bring their networks in. So more people, Ben was the composer. He's going to bring a whole different group of people to that exhibition and put different eyes on it than I can. So I think collaboration is really cool that way, especially if the roles are really defined and you're both open. Like, yeah, let it rip, you know?
That's great. Amber says they saw that.
Yeah, great.
Good year. Fantastic. All right, students, opening it up to your questions. Feel free to put those in the chat or just turn on your microphone.
I was going to say, I saw that using other people's audiences when you collaborate, you bring together, you get so many more eyeballs on your project. That's what happened in our Of Heaven and Earth exhibit at Goodyear. Like, it was, the opening night was really pretty big, pretty strong. We had like 10 people involved, so.
Yeah, and that was a great exhibition. It was good to see you guys evolve, and making art after you graduate is different. You know, nobody's telling you to do it, so it's just good to see everybody working.
Yeah. Do you have a rhythm, and I'm coming in late, so I'm sorry if I missed that. Do you have a rhythm in which you're like looking for calls, applying for calls, and then doing work? What is that rhythm like for you?
I'm super bad at applying for stuff. I think I used to, and I think when you're starting out, it's good to sort of apply to anything you think you could fit into. I don't make that really a part of my day, but if it's something that I think would be really important or could, I don't know, offer me something, I'll make some time to apply for that, but I don't put a ton of time into it. I really try not to. But once you kind of build a lot of those pieces out for applications, you'll find that they fit into others. And if it's an idea you really care about, most of the hard work's done for that application already, and you can kind of plug it into the next one. But yeah, I'm a poor example of somebody who seeks out opportunity like that, because it's important. But I'm also at a point where I don't want to say yes to everything, and I don't want to take every single opportunity, because I would really rather focus on what I think is important and what I think is going to be good for me going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, great question, Amber. Another thing that just came to mind, Matt, is you showed some images of where you create art. I think it's in your basement, you said.
Yeah.
Large pieces of machinery, which I'm sure are not cheap. So, you know, you graduate from college, you may have been really smart and just worked constantly and had tons of funds coming in. But how do students do that? How do students establish a studio? You know, when they get out of college, they may or may not have worked during college. But what are some of the strategies, I guess, you would go about either, you know, purchasing their equipment or purchasing, you know, mediums that they can start actually creating art?
Yeah, that's, I think, the toughest part. You know, when I graduated, I rented a house that had a garage because I knew I was gonna try to keep working in it. And it, you know, it obviously depends on everybody's needs. Every artist's needs are very different. Mine is very based in woodwork, and what I have found is that woodworking equipment is very expensive, but often doesn't go down in value. So, you know, right when I graduated, I bought a table saw, which is the tool that is maybe 50% of my practice, right? So I bought a table saw for $500. And then when I moved to Colorado later, I sold the table saw for $500. Like, Craigslist is a great way to kind of buy and sell those assets that don't depreciate the same way. But I know that that's different for, you know, people working in, say, like technology. That stuff starts depreciating immediately. You know, be smart about it. Like, if you want to invest in a tool, like, you know, I bought my CNC router. I didn't even know exactly what I wanted to do with it, and it was a big expense, and I knew that there was potential in it. And now it's like a cornerstone of my process. So I would say a lot of tools, make the investment. I would say first buy the cheapest version of something that you can, and if you're going to use it, sell that one, and then buy the most expensive version that you can and keep it forever. Space is the toughest one, though. I mean, space is always going to be a challenge, and it's going to continue to be more and more challenging. I, pursued a residency before I graduated, knowing that they were going to have facilities. And then I worked for that residency for years, in part because part of my job was getting access to those facilities. And if you can finagle something like that, that's the way to do it. Working, even if you're doing adjunct for a university, if you gain access to those facilities and resources, that's maybe worth more than whatever you're going to make teaching. But you can make art in a closet, and if it is really important, you'll find a way to prioritize it. I mean, we bought the house we bought because of that basement. It's your priorities will dictate some of that stuff, I think.
Oh, thank you so much. Anyone else have a question? As they're thinking. Any just final advice for artists, Matt? That I'm sure some of them, I meet with a lot of students and they're sort of teetering on the cusp of, can I do this? Can I do this full time? Do I need, how many multiple jobs do I need to make this work? Any final advice, just as they're trying to figure out, how can I be an artist in this day and age? What kinds of clients will buy my work? And just anything around that.
I think one piece of advice I'm going to give, I'm going to actually contradict myself. I was saying, maybe don't take every single opportunity, but some of the best little epiphanies I've had that have led to big changes in my work going forward have been from small pieces, from small shows, and there's a ton to be gained from just experimenting and continuing to beat your head against the wall. It all adds up to something. It's all, failure is the best teacher. It's important to fail a little bit, and don't be scared to. There's so much you're not going to tap into if you're scared to fail. I've done a lot of it, and they make for great stories later on, those failures.
Thank you so much. See, Mike says, working with the gallery, does your salary increase over the years or remain the same?
Great question. So when I say I work with a gallery, they're not paying me a salary. They're taking a percentage of what sells, right? So if I sell a piece for $10,000, they're keeping $5,000. But there's no regular money coming in like that. So it's a great incentive to sell the work and make work that you think will sell. Now to further answer that question, that arrangement could change over time. Maybe eventually you're in a position to leverage a 40-60 split, or you're paying for all the shipping, or you're paying for installation or delivery, or you're going to take 50% of the net versus the gross. There's different ways to do it, and every gallery is different, but 50-50 is pretty boilerplate.
Yeah, and just to build on that question, how do you decide what one of your pieces is worth? Does it come down to materials and time, or how do you calculate that?
It's definitely that. There's also sort of your work sort of accumulates an inherent value over time. So and that's not to say that my work is appreciating like Bitcoin or something. It means that I made this piece, it was $2,000. Well, I can't make that same piece again, obviously, but if I made something comparable, it should be at least $2,000. It shouldn't be less. And over time, your value will steadily increase. But now yeah, you certainly factor in time and materials, but also it's more about what do I want to make for this? Like, it's more of a gut thing of like, what do I want to walk away with if I'm going to take this on? But different artists approach that much more like a spreadsheet, and say, like a lot of painters charge by the inch. I feel like I have a little bit more of maybe an emotional take on price.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any other questions you'd like to put in the chat? We can definitely stay on the call just as other students may want to talk individually, but Matt, I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. This has been so fun to watch all of your art, and I was familiar with a couple of your pieces, but I love seeing just a bigger spectrum of the work that you've done. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, thank you all for being here. And I really appreciate being asked.